hello. I am Mr. Auerbach, and I will be your science teacher today. Today, we are going to talk about the natural selection. Of course, this is the centerpiece of Darwin's theory of evolution. Evolution by natural selection and descent with modification is what that really means. And so selection, first of all, means something decides that somebody lives and somebody dies. Or more important, not important whether you live or die as much as whether you do what. What does it really matter? Like like these birds on the island that we were looking at, the Daphne Major birds. What's that?
Like how they evolve?
Well, the evolution comes from some of them live, some of them die. Nature selects who sort of lives and dies, but not exactly living and dying is the important part as far as evolving. What do you have to do to really register yourself in the next generation?
Reproduce.
You have to reproduce, right? So it's not really as much as survival, even though you hear survival of the fittest all the time. It's not. It's reproduction of the fittest. Darwin doesn't care if you live to be a ripe old age, if I could, not to place Darwin as some sort of deity. Darwin is not a deity. But it is about reproduction. Right? How many offspring do you leave? So I left this up because this was the example in the book with the finches on Daphne Major. We had the drought, and that was what led to this change in the beak size from 9.2 to 9.7 millimeters. And so we have change over time, which is the thing that we're always talking about. And when the drought happened, the seeds became larger and harder on average, which meant that only birds with larger beak finches could survive. In this case, we really are talking about survival, right? Out of 1,400 birds, something like 1,100 of them died or something like that. I don't remember exactly how many, but it was like 85% of them died on the whole island. And it was the larger beaked ones that survived and reproduced. That's what that word says for you people playing at home and anybody else looking at this, I'm sorry. Survived and reproduced. Because that way, so when all the birds with little beaks died out, it was the birds with the big beaks that went on to make more birds. And they tended to have big beaks because descent with modification means that, and it means modification of the population, sort of, in a way, if you want to think about it, or the successful type was able to reproduce compared to none of the tiny beak birds that died. They died out. Here, there. There's your dead bird. They died out, and the ones that were left were the ones that reproduced, and so that trait descended. And by descent, they mean to the next generation. So with the other generations being up here, and like grandparents, parents, descent to the children. And that's sort of, in a nutshell, natural selection and all that. But what it always comes down to is, first of all, the struggle for survival is kind of the real background of the whole thing. Everything's struggling. Survival, no, not so much. Again, struggle for reproduction. Yes, everybody's struggling to survive. Some of us are, some are going to die, some aren't going to die. But it's really successfully passing on your genes. Okay, and struggle for reproduction. And how do you win? There's a few things that this comes down to. Is that for any trait within a population, there's variation. Okay? So any trait shows variation, right? Variation is differences. Like, think about how tall everybody in this room is. I doubt there are two people that are exactly the same height to the eighth of an inch. And if there are, that's unusual. But you can, if you see a distribution of heights in the population, I think for males, 5'8" is about the average. Whoops, I mean 8. And I think females 5'3" or 5'4". I'm not sure. But the point is, that means you're going to have people that are 4'8" over here, and you're going to have people that are 6'7" or whatever over here. And with every single trait that you can think of, there's variation. Not just how tall we are and how wide we are, but like the density of our bones, the acidity of our saliva, the thickness of our skin, the length of time you can hold your breath. And it doesn't matter what the thing is, at some point in an evolutionary situation, is that there's going to be some sort of selective event. And so I'll say any trait shows variation, 1. 2, then comes selection. Or then selection happens. And so there's nobody walking around nature with, a clipboard that's like, okay, you reproduce, no, just 1, you have 2. It's not like that, right? There's no actual selector like in a warehouse or something like that. It's an event or a change in the environment. Usually, in this case, it was a drought. The drought was the selection event. It could be anything, like, it depends what it is. It could be that there's a predator that's trying to get you, and maybe just being fast is the way that you evolve. Like if you think of gazelles that always have to deal with cheetahs, then of 100 gazelles that get born, you'll have a distribution of their possible speeds that they can run, or their camouflage ability, or whatever it is that might keep that hyena from, or the cheetah, from getting them. Or with cheetahs, the evolution is maybe how fast you can run, how long your claws are, how sharp your teeth are, how thick your skull is, because I know of one situation where evolution happened with some cheetahs based on, okay, I can't draw a cheetah skull. Oh, God. There we go, cheetah skull. Yeah, and their skull thickness affected the ability of the muscles in their jaw to be stronger or weaker. And it turns out that cheetahs with stronger jaws, when all the other food died out, let's say the gazelles had a disease and the gazelles died out for a few years. This sort of stuff happens in nature all the time. All the gazelles die out within 100 miles. Guess what? A lot of the cheetahs are going to die that might not have died in a normal year. Except for, it turns out in this one case, the ones with thicker skulls could eat, you see what that is? Turtles? Yeah, so it turns out that in a bad year, the gazelles with thicker skulls could eat turtles and get enough calories to stay alive. And so you never know what the selection event is going to be, and you never know what the variation is going to be that causes you to be able to survive and reproduce where others die. Like with giraffes. The giraffe situation, I'm not going to draw this. I don't have my green. Woo, okay. Everybody was cool in giraffe land. Evan, can you see up this high on the thing? Can you tell? Can you see?
Yeah.
Good. In normal years, all the things that eventually became giraffes were pretty much in the same situation. It didn't matter how long their necks were. Until, I don't have my brown, until all the grass died. Like maybe for 1,000,000 years it was nice and lush, but then for 1,000 years, like you get a 1,000-year drought or something like that. You think that sounds crazy, but this sort of stuff happens. This is nature. It's been going on for millions and billions of years. lots of droughts happen. Lots of droughts happen that things don't survive, just like with the animals. And that happened in giraffe land, apparently. And and maybe there was vegetation, I lost the green one again, that grew up high, and these were more drought resistant, and that was all that was left. And so, ones that had a bit of a longer neck survived. The ones that had a shorter neck didn't survive, or at least weren't as successful. See, you don't have to die to not be successful as far as evolution is concerned. Don't forget, these ones that get food, they have a nicer coat, they're stronger, they have more energy to pursue the opposite sex and try to mate. They have a brighter coat. They're more attractive for reproduction and able to reproduce in every way than something that's like half starved and straggling along. So you don't have to have been killed by the drought to not succeed as well as the one with the long neck that has the extra calorie supply, or the one with the thick skull that has the extra calories. Or it could be anything. With insects, it could be the ability to resist a poison that you've never encountered that gets sprayed on your field. Or even, I studied this, there's even behavior stuff. Like they studied these insects, they would spray two different types of insects, breeds, lines of insects with pesticides, and one had this habit of flailing around and freaking out whenever it was hit by pesticides. And you see that you spray Raid on an insect and it's like, and turns out that behavior helps them survive by throwing some of that poison off of themselves. So it's a sort of spastic response, and you see it and you're like, oh my God, that thing's a goner. But it turns out that that's a behavior that throws off some of the poison. That's not something that anybody plans for, right? That's just the way your nervous system is or whatever. I'm just saying, evolution, natural selection is wild because it works in so many ways. And I studied, I had my outside exams with a guy, Richard Lewontin from Harvard, when I was at Marlborough, and he wrote a book that said every single trait or feature of any living thing is grounds for evolution. You never know what it's going to be. Like with insects resisting insecticides, it could be how thick their skin is, how many copies they have of a gene that detoxifies, a million things. I'm not going to torture you with all that right now. But the point is, struggle for survival, any trait shows variation, selection happens, and if your variation helps, it's called an adaptation. So that's point 3. Believe it or not, there aren't that many more points. 3, helpful variation equals adaptation. Right? Adaptation, and that means that you're going to have a better chance of survival or reproduction because of the variation that you have. Taller, shorter, thicker skin, hold your breath longer, bigger, smaller, faster metabolism, whatever it is in that particular case, or with us, bigger brain. Anyway, let's not get started on that, I'll talk forever. So that is the basics, and then of course, fourth, just like we saw, in this case, the larger beaked ones survived, and that is descent with modification. That means that the population after that will tend to have, as a whole, larger beaks, and that will persist in the environment. So for descent with modification, or the winner reproduces, in a way, if you want to think about it that way, because descent with modification sounds like something somebody would say in the 19th century, but it is. And of course, biologists writing textbooks today because they love that stuff. If it's not an inaccessible word, they don't like it. Okay, descent with modification carries those successful traits through the population. Now, what's successful one day might not be successful the other day, and the last thing I'll say is, if you go on to look at Peter and Rosemary Grant's research, I think I told you there was totally the opposite thing happened a few years later, where it rained so much that the tribulus seeds died out and the portulaca and chimacia seed plants took over and made it so that all the large beaked animals starved and the small beaked animals survived. And at that point, the incidence of small beaks went up. And so, anyway, natural selection, it's fascinating. It's the central theme of biology. Everything in biology should be seen through the lens of natural selection and evolution. Natural selection is not the only vehicle for evolution, but it is the one we're learning today. We will learn more tomorrow. Thank you very much. I am Mr. Auerbach.